With how disappointing this past regular season was for the New York Rangers, there are definitely some pretty big questions involving this team heading into this upcoming season. And in today's video, we're going to take a look at NHL.com and Dan Rosen's kind of three big questions involving the Rangers heading into this upcoming 2025-26 season. And, obviously, this Rangers team, since the beginning of last regular season, definitely have made a ton of changes with this roster, of course the players, but also the coaching staff as well. So although they have tried to make some big changes, which they of course done, and I think for the most part there, a lot of these moves have been pretty good, but there are still some big questions with this team, with certain players that of course have been core players in the past, with the new coach that has come in there. So we're going to take a look at NHL.com's three questions involving the Rangers heading into this upcoming season, and we'll start off with question number one, which is, will Mika Zibanejad be a center or right wing? And for me, I definitely want to see Mika Zibanejad play this upcoming season on wing. I think with what we saw from him compared to, being a center and wing from this past season, there was a drastic difference and a major kind of drop off when he was playing center compared to wing. So personally, I am definitely all for him playing on the wing to begin this season. If things don't work out well or we have a big injury down the middle, then fine, push him back to center, I guess. But for me, I definitely want to see him start on the right wing, possibly alongside, JT Miller and Will Coley on the left side as well. I think that could be a pretty interesting kind of line combination. And also in this article, Dan Rosen does say that Zibanejad will likely start training camp as a right wing, playing on a line with JT Miller at center, which I've been kind of talking about that. That's kind of what I'm hoping for and kind of thinking will happen. So if that does, I will be very, very happy. And I just think, when Mika was playing center compared to wing, at center, he was not playing great at all defensively. He was a liability at moments. And of course, when he made that switch to wing, he wasn't some kind of Mark Stone, kind of shut down, kind of defensive winger type guy, obviously, but he was still a better, improved player, of course, and wasn't a liability defensively as on wing compared to where he was at center. So I think that first off is a big thing there, just that defensive game. He's going to be better on wing compared to center. Then you also have to factor in the offense that took a major step up. He was about like half a point per game on center, and then when he made the switch to wing, he was around a point per game mark, so about double the points per game kind of numbers there going from center to wing. So I think that's pretty incredible. He obviously became a much more lethal kind of threat offensively for this team, which I think with his cap at being at $8.5 million, realistically at this point with where things are at with Mika, you're probably not going to get that kind of full $8.5 million value out of him, but you still should be able to get around a point per game kind of player who should be just a pretty good top 6 caliber winger. He's not going to be some superstar player, but I just think at this point can be around a point per game player, bring some good offense, score 30 plus goals hopefully, and just be a good offensive threat for this team. And if he has to, play some center here and there if injuries happen or he doesn't quite work out on wing again, then I think that's fine. Put him on that third line center spot, I guess. But at the end of the day, I think starting him on wing is probably what's best for this Rangers team heading into this upcoming season. And the next question here is, what will Sullivan do to make an immediate impact? And he goes on to say in the article, Sullivan is already doing it. The new coach started reaching out to the players shortly after he was hired May 2nd. He said his focus this offseason is twofold, getting to know them and allowing them to get to know him. He said he has had many one-on-one conversations with the core players and also spent time this offseason with general manager Chris Drury. The two have had extensive conversations about their thoughts and plans for the season and how they hope to work together. The goal, Sullivan said, is to establish relationships with the players and Drury before training camp so when the Rangers get on the ice, they'll be able to get right to work. Quote, for me, it starts with the relationships with the players, Sullivan said. And I think a lot of that is great to hear. Mike Sullivan right away went out there to start to develop a relationship and a connection with some of the main players of this team. And I think with, a lot of kind of changes happening, that is definitely going to be a kind of big thing there to kind of keep this team together as a unit, as a team. So obviously with Mike Sullivan going out there and, starting to talk to some of the guys personally, I think that is definitely great to see, some one-on-one conversations with a lot of the core players. And then also, of course, he spent some time with Chris Drury, which I think is definitely going to be a big thing because from what I can tell, it seems like they're going to be the two guys kind of making a lot of the big decisions on and off the ice with this team. So I think them being tied at the hip together, having a good connection, a good relationship is definitely going to be very important. And of course, they have been on the same kind of team together in the past. For example, with Team USA at past events and at the past Four Nations face-off, where of course, Mike Sullivan was the head coach of the team and Chris Drury was an assistant general manager. So they have been together in the past, which is nice there, of course, and they have been battling against each other for years and years now, with the Rangers and Penguins being in the same division. So they would have obviously had a kind of previous somewhat of a relationship or connection before, which is nice, which I'm sure just made things a little easier to kind of come together here with the hiring process, I'm sure, but also just with them becoming a kind of team together, because they need to be together. They need to have the same mindset, the same kind of direction of this team. So I think them having a good bond, a good connection, a good relationship is definitely going to be a big thing for this team. And, whether or not some fans, like the hiring of Mike Sullivan or, wanted to see a guy like Chris Drury get fired or not, at this point, these are the guys who are running this team. We have to hope that they can, work together in a good way and put this team in the right position to obviously win, and hopefully they can end up doing that. And now for the third and final question from Dan Rosen of NHL.com is a pretty big one, and that is, who will replace Chris Kreider's minutes and production? And I think from last season, of course, he did miss some time there and definitely didn't have the best overall performance from his standards. Overall, the numbers weren't bad, but they definitely weren't up to kind of what you really expect out of someone like Chris Kreider, who kind of year in and year out, for the most part, is a pretty consistent kind of good player. But obviously this past season there wasn't too great, but still ended up having 30 points there, 22 goals, 8 assists in 68 games played. So it wasn't that bad just in general, but for his standards, it obviously wasn't great. And he did average 16 minutes and 45 seconds per night, which I think is obviously a pretty kind of, big role. Someone making, that amount of ice time there is having a pretty big role for this team. But I think we don't really have to worry about this too much, because we already saw a guy like Will Cooley, for example, take a massive step up this past season. They're having 45 points, 20 goals, and averaging about 15 minutes or so per night. So I think he can definitely take a lot of that kind of responsibility from a guy like Chris Kreider, also has that kind of penalty killing capability as well. So I think he's a pretty seamless kind of replacement for that. But, we also got some young guys as well knocking on the door, like Gabe Perreault, Brett Berard, Brendan Othman, that should also be able to really help kind of, of course, replace some of that kind of production and minutes lost there with someone like Kreider leaving. So I don't think this team should be too worried about that. Kreider, like I said, this past season was not the greatest, especially for his standards. So I don't think this kind of Kreider that we got from this past season should be very tough to kind of replace. Of course, the kind of previous Kreider, that kind of in his prime, is definitely not going to be easy to replace there. Someone who's capable of putting up around like 50 goals. That's not easy to find, but I think with this kind of Kreider that we got there, that 30-point kind of guy who was injured, wasn't playing the greatest, that's easy to replace there. So I wouldn't worry too much about kind of having to replace, what we saw from Kreider from this past season, of course, but, we obviously are going to lose the kind of Kreider off the ice there, where you got that good veteran leader, of course, who was the longest tenured Ranger at the time there, who was a fan favorite of many. So it is sad to see him go, but I definitely do think that this was the best move for, not only Kreider, but also the Rangers at this point in his career as well. It seems like it was what's best for both sides. So at the end of the day, I wish Kreider nothing but the best, and I hope he can have a lot of success as he finishes off his career, possibly in California with the Anaheim Ducks. Anyways, that's going to do it for today's video. If you have enjoyed, definitely don't forget to click that like and subscribe button for daily New York Rangers content, as I do post a video every single day about the New York Rangers. And also, of course, definitely don't forget to comment down below your thoughts on these kind of, 3 big questions with the Rangers. What are your thoughts, of course, on Mika Zibanejad? Do you want to see him play center or wing to begin this season? What are your thoughts, of course, on the kind of big questions surrounding someone like a Mike Sullivan and what kind of an impact he can possibly have on this team? And also, what are your thoughts on someone like a Will Cooley and, the rest of those kind of young guys there, with guys like Gabe Perreault, Othman, Berard, can help to replace what we've lost with someone like a Chris Kreider? Thanks for watching. I'll catch you next one, and let's go Rangers.